All right, at this point, we've talked about the beginning of the scientific method where we initially start with our observation, and then that lends us to proposing some hypotheses, some possible explanations, and then the hypotheses allow us to make predictions within a given experiment of what outcomes we're going to expect. And then, of course, after we kind of have the predictions in place, we're going to actually need to run the experiment. An important part of designing your experiment and then ultimately running it is identifying the experimental variables at play. So that's what we're going to do in this video, just talk about the different variables present within an experiment. Kind of the two main variables at the center of any experiment are the independent and dependent variable, okay? And a lot of times they go by slightly different names. Sometimes we will call this we'll call the independent variable, we'll also call it the treatment. Or sometimes it is called the experimental variable. Regardless of what name it goes by, basically the independent variable is going to be the factor that we believe is the driving difference in the way that subjects are responding. Okay, so this is the main factor that we are manipulating from one subject to the next, and we think that it's going to have an influence on something that we measure amongst those subjects. The thing that we're measuring amongst the subjects is the dependent variable, and it also goes by the name of response variable. So this is going to be whatever we are measuring or monitoring from our subjects. And kind of what we're doing within the scientific experiment is we are looking to see if there's a connection between these two variables. Essentially what we are doing is we are testing the idea. So the experiment is looking to see if the dependent variable, which I'm just going to abbreviate as dv, is either dependent or at least linked, it's a slash linked to the independent variable, okay? So we think the independent variable is kind of acting as a driving force and is influencing the dependent variable that is being measured amongst our subjects. Okay, so those are kind of the two main variables at the center of the experiment. Now, a lot of experiments will contain a control group of some type. Generally speaking, a control group kind of acts as a reference group. And what it's going to do is it's going to help us determine how effective the treatment actually is that's being tested. Okay. There's two kinds of control groups that you can have within a study. A native control group is going to be a group of individuals who do not get the treatment. Whatever the treatment being tested is, they might get something that looks like the treatment, something we'll talk about later called a placebo, but they're not going to actually get the active treatment that's being investigated in the study. And the entire purpose of the negative control group is to give you sort of a baseline measurement of your dependent variable, okay? Another way to think about this is we always have to ask ourselves, is the treatment that we are employing worthwhile? Almost all treatments are going to have some kind of side effect, or intervention might have some consequence as a result. So we have to ask ourselves, are we getting enough improvement from whatever we manipulated to warrant its implementation? And that's what the native control group is going to help us determine, is if getting nothing, if getting the treatment that's being tested is better than getting nothing at all. Is it even worthwhile intervening? The positive control group is going to be a group that receives whatever treatment is currently standard, or considered most effective. So a lot of times when we come up with a treatment that we're testing or an intervention, there might already be something that is generally used in those circumstances. And so we might want to ask ourselves, not only is a treatment worthwhile compared to nothing, but is this new treatment kind of at the forefront better than the treatments we already have? A positive control group would be a group that's getting a treatment that is already actively being used and is considered to be relatively effective. This is gonna allow us to decide if the new treatment is better than what has been previously given in similar circumstances. Okay, so control groups kind of give us that reference. Really what they're gonna do is they're gonna help us establish how effective the treatment that we're testing actually is. Control group is not to be confused with controlled variables. So controlled variables aren't groups like a control group is. Rather, it's factors that we're keeping the same amongst our subjects. Okay, so we can be keeping this the same between treatment groups and even within subjects of the same treatment group. The reason that we want to keep these the same is we don't want them to influence what we are measuring, our dependent variable. Recall that in a controlled experiment, we allow one thing to vary, that's our independent variable, and then we're trying to keep everything else constant as much as we possibly can. The things that we are keeping constant are those controlled variables that we're trying to keep the same. And usually a controlled experiment is going to have many controlled variables because we're going to want to try to keep a lot of factors identical between our subjects. And then finally, the subjects are the units that your experiment and or your treatment is actually being applied to. Technically, subjects can be both living and non-living entities, but since this is a biology class and biology is the study of life, the subjects that we're usually working with in biology are some type of living organism.